I am Valerie, and the final, most satisfying moment of my decade-long divorce saga began with a petty act of holiday cruelty. At 56 years, I'd rebuilt my life as a successful entrepreneur after a painful split, yet my extended family, led by my ex-husband Richard's vindictive sister, Aunt Carol, still viewed me as the family pariah. A cautionary tale. The woman who'd ruined Richard's life. This year, I was invited to the massive Thanksgiving dinner with suspicious enthusiasm. I should have known something was wrong when Carol's voice on the phone was too sweet, too insistent. You simply must come, Valerie. Family is everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. Family had been everything until I'd refused to be Richard's doormat anymore. I arrived at Carol's colonial mansion 30 minutes early, hoping to avoid the crowd. But the house was already full. Cars lined the circular driveway like sentries. I recognized them all: Uncle Barry's Lexus, Cousin Jennifer's SUV, Emma's hybrid. They'd all arrived early, too. For a gathering that was supposed to start at 3 p.m., the fact that everyone had shown up by 2:30 felt orchestrated. The moment I stepped through the front door, conversation stuttered and stopped. Eyes tracked me across the foyer like I was a convict entering the prison cafeteria. I held my head high, carrying the pie I'd baked, my grandmother's recipe, the one that used to win praise at every family gathering back when I was still worthy of praise. The dining room was transformed into a hierarchy made visible. The main table, an enormous mahogany beast Carol had inherited from her mother, seated 20 adults. Every detail screamed wealth and belonging. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon light, china plates with gold trim gleamed, fresh flowers in expensive arrangements perfumed the air, and place cards in elegant calligraphy marked each person's designated spot. I scanned the cards quickly, looking for my name. Nothing. I walked around the entire table, reading each name twice, thinking perhaps I'd missed it. Jennifer. Barry. Emma. Michael. Even Richard's new girlfriend Melissa had a place card, a woman who'd been in this family for all of 6 months. But no Valerie. After an agonizing 5 minutes of public confusion, during which I felt every pair of eyes tracking my humiliation with a mixture of pity and satisfaction, Aunt Carol glided over with a smile that didn't reach her cold blue eyes. She moved with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and was enjoying every second of it. Valerie dear, you're sitting over there, with the younger crowd. She gestured with one perfectly manicured hand toward the corner of the room, the forgotten space where people hung their coats and dumped their bags when they arrived. There was a flimsy card table that looked like it had been purchased at a discount store in 1987, covered with a paper tablecloth featuring cartoon turkeys. It was positioned next to the coat closet, away from the fireplace's warmth, away from the conversation, away from any sense of belonging. Surrounding it were 5 restless children aged 7 to 12, already fidgeting with their plastic cups and looking supremely bored. The humiliation was absolute and intentional. A deliberate public demotion designed to remind me, and everyone else, of my diminished status in this family. Look at Valerie, the seating arrangement screamed. Look at where she ended up after leaving Richard. She thought she was too good for him, and now she's sitting with the children like a teenager who can't be trusted with the adults. My cheeks burned hot with shame and anger, but I swallowed my pride, choosing silence over a scene. I'd learned long ago that showing weakness to this family was blood in the water. They'd circle and attack, each one emboldened by the others. The pile-on was their favorite sport. I sat down with the children, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass on my face. A 7-year-old with jam already smeared across his face and turkey stuck in his hair immediately asked, "Are you in timeout?" Out of the mouths of babes. Something like that, I murmured, maintaining my composure. I had to. A bigger storm was brewing, I could feel it in my bones, and I needed my wits sharp. I'd received a cryptic text message the night before from an unknown number, "Tomorrow will be interesting." I'd suspected it was Richard, but I couldn't prove it. The seating arrangement wasn't just a slight, it was psychological warfare orchestrated by Carol, who'd sided with her brother with religious fervor throughout the divorce. She believed that since the split, my worth had diminished to nothing. In her eyes, I was the villain who'd abandoned her perfect brother. Never mind that Richard had spent our entire marriage criticizing every decision I made, undermining my business ventures, and treating our home like a hotel where he occasionally slept between affairs. The physical discomfort of the folding chair, the endless questions from bored children, why are you old? What's in the closet? Do you have a boyfriend? The way conversations at the adult table would suddenly hush when I looked over, it all magnified the psychological isolation. I was an exhibit in the Museum of Failed Marriages, but then I noticed something that made my pulse quicken and my stomach clench. Through the front windows, past the meticulously decorated porch with its autumn wreaths and corn stalks, I saw a familiar car pulling into the driveway. A sleek black Mercedes S-Class that I'd once shared ownership of, back when we'd argued about everything from leather seat colors to whether his and hers cars were bourgeois or practical. My ex-husband's car. My first thought was that he'd come to pick something up, or maybe drop off his girlfriend who'd apparently made the guest list while I'd been demoted. But something felt wrong. The way he parked, aggressive, taking up space meant for two cars. The way he sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting his tie. This wasn't a casual drop-off. The front door opened, and Richard appeared like a dark cloud over a picnic, like a shark circling a beach. He wasn't invited. I'd confirmed that with Carol's daughter Emma weeks ago during one of our secret coffee meetings at that bistro across town where nobody from the family ever went. Emma, bless her, was the only family member who'd remained neutral, who'd seen through Richard's charm to the manipulator beneath, who'd warned me that something was being planned but she didn't know what. Now I knew. Richard stood in the entryway looking like an undertaker at a wedding, or maybe a prosecutor at a sentencing hearing, in an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost $3,000. It was completely out of place amidst the warm chaos of Thanksgiving, the football game murmuring on TV in the den, children running through hallways, the smell of turkey and sage filling the air. His hair was grayer than I remembered, shot through with silver at the temples. His face was harder, more lined, like bitterness had carved itself into his features over the past 4 years. His eyes found me immediately at my children's table, with the precision of a heat-seeking missile, and a cold, predatory smile spread across his face, the same smile he'd worn when he'd served me the original divorce papers at my mother's funeral, when he'd known I was at my weakest and most vulnerable. The seating arrangement hadn't been Carol's cruelty alone. It had been the setup. They'd collaborated. The room fell into immediate, suffocating silence. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the children sensed the shift in atmosphere and fell quiet. Richard advanced slowly, deliberately, like a prosecutor approaching a witness stand. He walked past the main table, Carol's face transformed into an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between shock and satisfaction, and stopped directly at my flimsy card table, blocking what little light came from the hallway. "Valerie," he announced, his voice carrying across the room with practiced authority. The voice he'd used in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in our bedroom when he wanted to make me feel small. "Happy Thanksgiving." He reached into his suit jacket with the flourish of a magician revealing his final trick. Out came a thick legal envelope, cream-colored and official. He slammed it down next to my untouched plate of mashed potatoes. The children jumped. One started to whimper. "This is a summons," he declared to the entire room, not just to me. "I am serving you right here, right now, for the $150,000 you fraudulently owe me." The adults at the main table erupted in shocked gasps and immediate accusations. I heard Uncle Barry shout, "On Thanksgiving?" Cousin Jennifer knocked over her wine glass. Aunt Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, though whether from genuine surprise or theatrical performance, I still couldn't tell. Richard had publicly escalated a private financial dispute into a catastrophic, humiliating spectacle designed to destroy my peace and my reputation before the entire extended family. This was his masterpiece of malice. But here's what Richard didn't know: the summons wasn't a surprise to me. 3 days ago, my lawyer Thomas Varick had called me with a warning. "Valerie, Richard's attorney filed something unusual. It looks like he's planning to serve you personally, and soon. The timing and the tactics suggest he wants maximum humiliation. Be prepared." Thomas had been through the trenches with me for 4 years. He knew Richard's playbook. What was a surprise was the audacity of serving me on a federal holiday, at a family gathering, in front of children. That was pure Richard, always pushing boundaries, always assuming his charm and confidence would excuse any transgression. The summons represented the final, desperate move in a complex, multi-year legal battle over the valuation of my first business, a tech startup I'd built from scratch while Richard claimed he'd supported me by allowing me to work 70-hour weeks. During our divorce, he tried and failed to claim ownership, settling instead for a percentage based on asset valuations. He claimed that a specific technology patent, the Quantum Connect protocol, which I had valued at $20,000 during our separation, was actually worth $150,000 today. His argument was that I had deliberately undervalued it to cheat him out of his rightful share of the marital assets. His claim was false, based on a massive misinterpretation of the patent's market trajectory and sheer greed. But more than that, it was based on his fundamental misunderstanding of me. Richard had always underestimated me. It was his fatal flaw. The children at the table looked terrified, staring at the envelope like it was a bomb. I reached out calmly and slowly picked up the envelope, inspecting it with professional detachment, ignoring the panic swirling around me. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed even. This, I realized, was my moment. Not his. I looked up from the summons, met Richard's arrogant, triumphant gaze, and delivered my first, calm verbal counterstrike. "Richard," I stated, my voice dangerously level, cutting through the escalating family noise like a knife, "this is a federal holiday, and you are not a licensed process server. You are trespassing on private property. Get out of this house." He smirked widely, assuming my calm was merely a facade covering deep terror. That's what he'd always assumed, that beneath my composure, I was secretly panicking, secretly needing him, secretly regretting leaving him. "It's legal now, Valerie," he sneered, pointing dramatically to the summons. "You owe me $150,000, and everyone here knows what kind of thief you truly are." I ignored the insult entirely. I'd heard variations of it for years. Instead, I stood up slowly from the flimsy children's chair, and delivered the first legal hook. "Richard," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "you just served me on a federal holiday, in a private residence, in front of minors. My lawyer is going to have a field day invalidating this entire pathetic, embarrassing stunt. But before you go, you need to understand one crucial thing." My authoritative tone, the voice I used with investors, with board members, with people who mattered, instantly silenced the entire room. Even the 7-year-old stopped whimpering. I paused deliberately, allowing the full weight of the silence and the absurdity of the children's table setting to amplify the drama of my next move. I was no longer the humiliated pariah. I was the executive in absolute control. I looked directly at the crowd of stunned adults at the main table, ensuring they were paying total attention, then back at Richard. "The $150,000 you are aggressively demanding is entirely based on the perceived value of the Quantum Connect patent," I stated clearly. "The technology that's been the crux of our financial dispute for 4 years." Richard nodded triumphantly, like a student who finally knows an answer. He was so predictable. "You claim I defrauded you by undervaluing it at $20,000 during the divorce settlement. You claim, based on your faulty market analysis, it's worth $150,000 today." I let the numbers hang in the air, allowing the family to mentally calculate the difference. I could see Uncle Barry trying to do the math. Cousin Jennifer had pulled out her phone, probably opening her calculator app. Then I delivered the first twist that nobody, least of all Richard, saw coming. "You all know I successfully sold my entire business 6 months ago," I stated, cutting off the family whispers before they could build. The room nodded. Most of them had heard through the grapevine, though no one had asked me about it directly. I'd been exiled from their curiosity as thoroughly as I'd been exiled from their table. What you don't know, because I chose not to share, is the price. I paused, watching Richard's face. The smirk was still there, but something uncertain flickered behind his eyes. The valuation of the Quantum Connect patent, the very patent Richard claims is worth $150,000 today, was the cornerstone of that sale. "And, Richard," I said, looking him dead in the eye, forcing him to absorb the absolute truth, "the market determined that patent's current value was not $20,000, and it wasn't even the $150,000 you are suing me for in this pathetic court summons." Richard looked confused, then annoyed, still smugly assuming I was about to confirm a figure slightly higher than his estimate. Maybe $175,000. Maybe $200,000. Just enough to make him look slightly foolish but not devastated. This entire public performance was about to deliver the most delicious, perfect public humiliation imaginable. I delivered the financial detonation with surgical precision. "The final, agreed-upon market valuation of the patent you accuse me of undervaluing was finalized 6 months ago at $3.20 million. The room exploded. It wasn't just a gasp. It was a collective, roaring sound of shock and utter disbelief that drowned out the soft holiday music and the children's startled whimpers. Someone dropped a serving spoon. Glass shattered somewhere. Uncle Barry shouted, "What?" Richard's face went from pale arrogance to a sickening shade of gray, all the color draining out like someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "My business, built around that technology, sold 6 months ago for $18 million, I continued, ensuring every single adult absorbed the truly staggering numbers. I watched them process it. $18 million. The $150,000 you are suing me for represents less than 1% of the actual, realized value I received." I folded the summons envelope neatly and placed it back on the children's table. One of the kids reached out to touch it, fascinated. "You wasted 4 years fighting over the price of a penny, Richard, while I worked and made the rest of the fortune." The room erupted into utter chaos. Family members were shouting questions simultaneously at a frozen Richard. $18 million? Is she serious? Carol, did you know about this? Aunt Carol was attempting a panic damage control effort, picking up the dropped spoon, dabbing at spilled wine, her hands shaking. Richard stood frozen, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and ridiculous on his diminished frame. He stammered, finally finding a voice, though it came out thin and high-pitched, nothing like his earlier confidence. "That's a lie, Valerie. You fabricated those numbers. You're trying to hide the assets from the court." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment he'd accuse me of lying, giving me the perfect opportunity to deliver the evidence that would destroy him completely. I smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time that evening. I pulled out my phone, opened a high-resolution PDF I'd prepared specifically for this moment, and calmly handed it to Aunt Carol, placing her directly in the crosshairs of the humiliation. If she'd conspired with Richard, she deserved this. If she hadn't, she needed to see what her brother truly was. "Carol, read this aloud, please." It's the front page of the acquisition agreement, notarized by the state, detailing the patent valuation and the total sale price. Carol looked at the phone like it was a venomous snake. Her hands trembled as she took it. For a long moment, she just stared at the screen, her face going through a remarkable transformation, confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally, horrified understanding. "Read it, Carol," I said gently but firmly. Her voice came out as a whisper at first, then stronger as she realized there was no escaping this moment. Acquisition agreement. Quantum Connect patent valuation, $3.2 million. Total purchase price, $18 million. Buyer, Tech Venture Capital Group. Seller, Valerie Morrison. The name, my maiden name, the one I'd reclaimed after the divorce, hung in the air like a victory banner. Richard's entire narrative, that I was a thief, that I was incompetent, that he was the injured party, collapsed instantly into dust. But I wasn't finished. There was one more twist, one more revelation that would ensure Richard never recovered from this humiliation. Richard, I said, my voice cold with professional finality, you tried to ruin my holiday and steal a fraction of my assets through deceit. Now, you need to call your lawyer. Not to fight this invalid summons, but to advise you on the $100,000 counterclaim I filed against you yesterday for frivolous litigation. Another collective gasp. The hits just kept coming. You will be funding that entirely, regardless of where I choose to sit this holiday. But there's something else you should know, something I've kept quiet about until this very moment. I paused, watching Richard's face carefully. The confident mask was cracking, revealing the panic underneath. He sensed another blow coming but couldn't imagine what could be worse than what I'd already revealed. His eyes darted to the door, calculating escape routes. But Uncle Barry had moved to block the exit, arms crossed over his massive chest. 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by the Securities and Exchange Commission. I let that land like a bomb. Several people literally stumbled backward. They're investigating insider trading allegations related to someone who had access to knowledge about my company's sale. Someone who made several suspiciously timed stock purchases in companies that would benefit from my technology. Someone who made these purchases 3 months before my sale was publicly announced. The silence was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on Carol's expensive Persian rug. I haven't named names to the SEC yet, I continued, my voice steady and cold. But I provided them with phone records, email metadata, and financial statements that paint a very interesting picture. A picture of someone who thought they could profit from information they pressured their sister into sharing. Someone who thought he was so much smarter than everyone else that he'd never get caught. I looked meaningfully at Aunt Carol, whose face had gone through a remarkable transformation, from red to white to green in the span of seconds. She looked like she might be sick. Carol, I said softly, but my voice carried across the now silent room, did you really think Richard asked you all those questions about my business out of fraternal concern? All those phone calls where he wanted to know about my meetings, my contracts, my negotiations? Did you really believe he just wanted to make sure his ex-wife was being smart with her money? Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. No sound came out. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to set down the wine glass she'd been clutching. He used you, I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. He used this family. He pumped you for information at every gathering, every phone call, every casual coffee date. And when his insider trading didn't pan out the way he'd hoped, when he realized he'd bought the wrong stocks based on his misunderstanding of my technology and lost money instead of making it, he decided to sue me instead, hoping to recoup his losses and save face. This was the twist even I hadn't fully pieced together until 2 weeks ago, when the SEC investigator, a sharp woman named Agent Morrison who reminded me of my younger self, had shared some of their preliminary findings in exchange for my cooperation. Richard hadn't just been greedy, he'd been criminal. And worse, he'd been stupid about it. He'd used his own brokerage account, made obvious trades, left a digital paper trail that a first-year law student could follow. The $150,000 he's suing me for? I added. That's almost exactly what he lost in his illegal stock trades. The room was no longer chaotic. It was dead silent except for the sound of Richard's heavy breathing. He looked like he might vomit or pass out or both. Get out of this house, Richard, I said quietly. And take your fraudulent summons with you. For a moment, no one moved. Then Uncle Barry stood up, all 6'4" of him, and walked over to Richard. You heard her, Barry said, his voice like gravel. Get out. Cousin Jennifer's husband Michael stood up too, then Emma, then 3 others. They surrounded Richard, not touching him but making their intent clear. Richard, utterly defeated, legally exposed, and facing potential federal charges, backed toward the door. His face was the color of old newspaper. This isn't over, Valerie, he tried to snarl, but it came out as a whimper. Yes, Richard, I said calmly. It is. 2 of the men physically escorted him out. I heard his Mercedes start up, tires squealing as he fled like the coward he'd always been beneath the expensive suits and fake confidence. The aftermath was immediate and profound. The entire family swarmed my flimsy children's table. The 7-year-old next to me looked overwhelmed but also delighted by the drama. Aunt Carol was stammering endless apologies, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know, she kept saying. Valerie, I swear I didn't know what he was doing. He told me he just wanted to make sure you were okay financially. I thought I was helping. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a woman who'd been manipulated as thoroughly as I had been during my marriage. Richard was a master at that. Carol, I said, I believe you. But you need to understand something. I was forced to sit at this table because you all believed Richard's lies about my incompetence and his ownership over my success. I chose to wait until the exact moment he tried to legally ruin me to show you all the truth. The respect in the room was instant and total. Years of condescension evaporated, replaced with stunned awe. Uncle Barry shook his head in disbelief. $18 million. Val, why didn't you tell us? Because you didn't ask, I said simply. Because when I tried to share my business successes over the years, someone always changed the subject or implied I was bragging. Because Richard told you all I was difficult and bitter, and you believed him without ever asking for my side. The guilt on their faces was palpable. The $150,000 summons, I concluded, was designed to destroy me. Instead, it became the perfect platform to expose his toxicity and confirm my success. I turned my attention to the children, who'd been watching this adult drama with wide eyes. Children, I announced, smiling genuinely now, I'm sorry for all the yelling and drama. But let me tell you something important. Never let anyone make you feel small. Never let anyone tell you what you're worth. You decide that. The 7-year-old nodded solemnly. Are you like a superhero? I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who worked hard and didn't give up. My lawyer Thomas Varick called an hour later, confirming what I already knew. The summons was invalid due to improper service. More importantly, my $100,000 counterclaim was proceeding. And the SEC investigation? That was very real and very serious. Richard's life, I learned over the following weeks, unraveled completely. The court threw out his motion with prejudice, meaning he could never file the same claim again. My counterclaim was upheld, and he was ordered to pay not just the $100,000 but also my legal fees, which were substantial. The SEC investigation revealed that Richard had made over $200,000 in illegal trades based on insider information, but had panicked and sold too early, resulting in losses. He was facing federal charges, significant fines, and possible jail time. Aunt Carol, devastated by her brother's betrayal and her unwitting role in his schemes, became one of my strongest advocates in the family. She invited me to the next family gathering and ensured my place card was at the head of the table. But perhaps the sweetest revenge was the emotional shift I felt within myself. I walked over to the main adult table, picking up my barely touched plate from the children's table. I placed it carefully in the seat where Carol had originally intended me to sit, symbolic closure. Then I quietly took the empty seat at the head of the main table, next to my aging father, who smiled at me with pride I hadn't seen in years. "I always knew you were special, Val," he whispered. No one questioned my move. No one objected. The shift in power, status, and respect was total and permanent. I was no longer the pariah. I was the family's financial matriarch, the strategic genius who turned an attack into a victory. More importantly, I was finally free from Richard's shadow. The children, still excited by the evening's drama, demanded to hear the complete story of how I built and sold my company. I told them, not about the money, but about the late nights, the failures, the moments I wanted to quit, and why I didn't. I told them about building something from nothing, about believing in yourself when no one else does, about turning pain into power. The ensuing months saw complete and absolute vindication. Richard pleaded guilty to insider trading to avoid a lengthy trial that would have publicly aired every detail of his crimes and humiliation. He received 2 years in federal prison and a $500,000 fine. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who clearly had no patience for privileged men who thought the rules didn't apply to them, made sure the sentencing was harsh enough to send a message. He was forced to liquidate everything, his house, the one he'd bought with his girlfriend to upgrade from our modest home, his car, his boat, even his extensive wine collection, to pay his debts, legal fees, and my counterclaim. I attended the sentencing hearing. I didn't speak, didn't gloat. I just sat in the gallery, dressed professionally, and watched justice unfold. When Richard was led away in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time, and I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine defeat. Not the theatrical defeat he'd performed during our marriage when he didn't get his way. Real, crushing defeat. The knowledge that he'd destroyed himself through his own arrogance and greed. Aunt Carol suffered the profound humiliation of having her manipulative brother exposed as a criminal in her own dining room, during her own holiday celebration. For weeks after Thanksgiving, she barely left her house. The shame was overwhelming. But she handled it with unexpected grace. She called me 2 months later, asking if we could meet for coffee. At that same bistro where Emma and I had met secretly, Carol apologized, really apologized, not the performative apology of that Thanksgiving afternoon. I enabled him his whole life, she confessed, tears streaming down her face. I made excuses for every terrible thing he did. I told myself he was just misunderstood, that women didn't appreciate him, that you were the problem. I was so wrong, Valerie. About everything. We cried together that day. And slowly, painfully, we rebuilt something I never expected: friendship. Real friendship, based on truth instead of family obligation. She became one of my closest allies, the person I call when I need honest advice or just someone who understands the complexity of loving and hating someone simultaneously. The family dynamic shifted permanently and irrevocably. Richard became the cautionary tale whispered about at gatherings: what happens when ego and greed overtake ethics, when you underestimate the people around you, when you think you're untouchable. I became the undisputed success story, though I tried hard not to let that define me. I didn't want to be Valerie who made $18 million. I wanted to be Valerie who survived, who thrived, who helped others do the same. Looking back now, months later, I sometimes walk past Carol's house and think about that flimsy card table next to the coat closet. That table, initially intended as a symbol of shame, became the unexpected stage for my greatest victory. It taught me that status isn't granted by others' opinions or seating arrangements. It's earned through strength, resilience, and strategic patience. I'd sat with those children for 2 hours, absorbing the injustice, waiting for precisely the right moment to strike back. Richard's $150,000 summons was, in the end, the best gift he ever gave me. It provided the perfect public platform to expose his true character, reveal my success, and reclaim my dignity in front of everyone who doubted me. My Thanksgiving humiliation became my ultimate vindication. And the best part? The children from that table, all 5 of them, still send me emails and drawings. The 7-year-old who asked if I was in timeout now wants to be an entrepreneur when he grows up. His mother told me he talks about me constantly, about how Miss Valerie turned being at the kids' table into winning everything. That's the real victory. Not the money, not the vindication, not even Richard's downfall. It's knowing that 5 children watched a woman refuse to accept humiliation, fight back with truth and evidence, and win with grace. They watched me transform shame into power. And maybe, just maybe, when life tries to seat them at the children's table, they'll remember to smile, be patient, and wait for their moment to stand up and reclaim their seat. Because that's what winners do.